I used to believe that after 30 years of marriage, a person becomes almost transparent to you. You know, their habits, their moods, the way they sigh when something bothers them, and the way they smile when they try to hide that they're tired. For a long time, I was sure I knew my wife better than anyone else. After all, we'd grown older together. We'd raised children, survived losses, celebrated victories, paid off debts, and built a life that looked stable from the outside. But stability, as I later learned, doesn't always mean closeness. It all began on a completely ordinary morning. I woke up late, already stressing about deadlines and meetings. I rushed into the kitchen, grabbed my briefcase, and barely glanced at the breakfast she'd prepared. My wife softly asked, "Will you be home late today?" I didn't even lift my eyes from my phone. "Yeah, busy day," I muttered, scrolling through emails as if they were more important than the sound of her voice. She nodded, a quiet, almost invisible nod, and continued clearing the table. I left the house thinking about everything except her. But that evening, when I returned, something felt different. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. On the table, she'd set dinner, but only for one person. I frowned. In 30 years, she had never eaten without me, no matter how late I came home. I looked around and found her sitting in the living room near the window. She wasn't reading. She wasn't knitting or watching TV or doing anything at all. She just sat there, silently, almost as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. I approached her and asked, "Are you okay?" She didn't look at me at first. Instead, she let out a slow breath, the kind that feels heavy with months, maybe years of unspoken words. Then she finally said, "We live together, but you haven't really been here for a long time." I froze. I thought she was exaggerating, being emotional, misunderstanding my efforts. But as soon as she continued speaking, all my excuses dissolved before they even reached my lips. "You're around, but not present," she said quietly. "You don't listen when I talk. You don't notice when something is wrong. You come home, sit with your phone or your laptop, and your body is here, but you aren't. And I'm tired of feeling like a background object in my own home." Those words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in years, I had nothing to say. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Not because we didn't have anything to say, but because, deep down, we both knew that this conversation should have happened years ago. I sat down across from her, feeling strangely like a guest in my own home. She kept her eyes on the window, as if the world outside was easier to look at than me. "I didn't know you felt this way," I finally said. She shook her head slightly. "That's the problem. You haven't known how I felt for a long time." Her words weren't angry. They weren't sharp or dramatic. They were simply tired, and that tiredness scared me far more than anger ever could. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain how hard I'd been working, how stressed I was, how life had become heavier with age. Responsibilities and worries, but every explanation felt like a weak attempt to justify neglect, because the truth is, she was right. I had stopped noticing the small things, the little moments that used to matter so much in the early years of our marriage. Her quiet laughter, her questions about my day, the way she'd touch my arm when I looked overwhelmed. They had all become background noise to me, and I knew exactly when it had happened. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, gradually, over time. Life had become busy. Work had become the priority. I convinced myself I was doing it for us, for our future, for our comfort. But in that pursuit, I'd forgotten that comfort means nothing if the heart of the home feels lonely. "I miss you," she said suddenly. Her voice trembled just enough for me to feel it like a crack in my chest. "You're here, but I miss the way you used to listen. The way you used to share everything with me. The way we used to talk about life like it was something we were building together, instead of something we were just surviving." She pressed her fingers together, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I don't need expensive things. I don't need grand gestures. I just want you. The real you, not the distracted, half-present version that comes through the door every night." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the guilt settle like a weight on my shoulders. Not guilt forced by her, but the kind that comes when you finally see yourself clearly. I thought about all the evenings I came home exhausted, scrolling through my phone while she tried to tell me something about her day. All the times she asked if I wanted to go for a walk, and I said maybe another time. All the nights I lay in bed, physically close but mentally miles away. And I realized you can lose someone even while they're still sitting right in front of you. I don't want us to drift any further apart, she whispered. I'm telling you this because I still care, but I can't be the only one trying. Her voice broke on the last word, and something inside me broke with it. For the first time in a long time, I reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, I felt something I thought we'd lost, a fragile thread still connecting us. I'm here, I said quietly. And I'm listening now? That night, after our conversation, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over again. It wasn't the criticism that kept me up. It was the realization of how blind I had been, how many moments I had missed, how many quiet signs I had ignored simply because I assumed we were fine. For years, I thought being a good husband meant providing, fixing things around the house, and making sure our bills were paid. I believed love was shown through responsibility, through the things I did, not through the time I gave. But lying there in the dark, I understood something that should have been obvious. Presence is a gift, and I had stopped giving it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My wife was already in the kitchen making coffee. She didn't notice me right away. She was moving slowly, thoughtfully, as if she were lost in her own thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I actually watched her. Not glanced at her, not saw her in passing, but really watched her. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she hummed softly when she thought she was alone, the faint line of worry on her forehead, a line I realized I had helped create. And in that moment, I felt something familiar return, something I hadn't felt in years, a gentle, warm appreciation for the woman who had stood beside me for decades. Good morning, I said quietly. She looked up, almost startled. Oh, good morning. Her smile was polite, hesitant, the kind of smile someone gives when they're not sure how to act. That small detail hurt more than I expected. I walked closer. Can we have breakfast together today? She paused, as if trying to understand whether this was another one of those moments where I would get distracted and rush off again. But when she saw I was serious, she nodded. We sat at the table, the same table we had shared thousands of meals at. But for the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't a wall. It was something new, something honest, something hopeful. I asked her how she had slept. She told me she had been up for a while, thinking. Not about the argument, she said, but about us. I don't want to lose what we had, she admitted. I just don't want to feel invisible. Invisible. That word stayed with me. How many times had she spoken while I stared at my phone? How many times had she hoped for a little affection? A simple gesture, a warm touch? And I was too preoccupied to notice. When we finished breakfast, she stood up to collect the dishes out of habit, and then something small but important happened. I reached over and gently touched her arm. I see you, I said, and I meant it more deeply than I had meant anything in years. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and emotion. A single tear escaped down her cheek, not because she was sad, but because someone finally acknowledged what she had been feeling for so long. It was a small moment, a simple moment. But sometimes the smallest moments carry the biggest meaning. For the first time in a long time, we felt like partners again. Over the next few days, something shifted between us. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gently, like the slow return of sunlight after a long winter. We weren't magically healed, of course. Marriage doesn't work like a switch you flip. But we were taking small steps. And for the first time in a long time, we were taking them together. I started by doing something painfully simple. I listened. It sounds like such an easy thing, doesn't it? Just listen. But after years of half attention, it felt almost strange at first. I realized how many times she had spoken to me while I nodded absent-mindedly, given the illusion of presence without the reality of it. Now, when she talked, I put aside my phone. I turned my chair toward her. I looked into her eyes and really heard the words she was saying, and the feelings behind them. And little by little, she began to open up again. One evening, she was telling me about a book she had been reading. Nothing extraordinary, just a small detail from her day. But the way her voice softened when she talked about the story made me realize how long it had been since she shared anything with that kind of warmth. You know, she said, smiling shyly, I used to tell you everything. And you used to ask questions. You were curious. I want to be that person again, I admitted. She touched my hand gently. I hope you can be. I've missed him. Those words stayed with me long after she went to bed. The next weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I planned a walk for us. Nothing fancy, just a quiet stroll through the park near our house. The same park where we used to bring the kids when they were little. The same place we walked hand in hand before life got busy. When I told her about it, she looked at me with a kind of cautious hope. A walk? Now? As long as you want to, I said. We went in the early evening. The air was cool and the leaves rustled softly around us. At first we walked in silence, both of us unsure how to bridge the emotional distance that had grown between us. But then she slipped her hand into mine, not tightly, not the way she used to, just softly, like someone testing whether a familiar gesture still fit. And it did. It felt right. It felt like home. As we walked, we talked about simple things, the weather, the neighborhood, memories from years ago. But even those small conversations meant something. They weren't about the topics themselves. They were about connection. Do you remember when we used to come here with the children? She asked, smiling faintly. I do, I said. I remember chasing them around while you tried to keep everyone from falling into the pond. She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. I miss those days, she said. Me too, I replied. But I don't want us to miss these days too. She stopped walking and looked at me carefully, as if searching my eyes for sincerity. I want to believe you, she said quietly, and I knew then that rebuilding trust wasn't about promises. It was about consistency. So I squeezed her hand gently and said, You'll see it, not just hear it. And from the look in her eyes, I could tell she wanted to believe that. She wasn't ready to fully trust yet, but she was ready to hope. And sometimes hope is the first step toward healing. As the weeks passed, I began to notice something I had forgotten long ago. Love isn't built on grand gestures or expensive gifts. It lives in the small moments, the tiny choices we make every day that show we care, that we are present, that we are paying attention. I started with the mornings. Instead of rushing out the door with my coffee, I sat with her at the table, listening to her talk about her plans for the day. Sometimes she rambled about something trivial, a neighbor's dog, a recipe she wanted to try, a book she hadn't finished. And I realized these small details were her way of connecting. I stopped interrupting or brushing them off. I started asking questions, and she started smiling more often. I also noticed how she reacted to small touches, a hand on her shoulder, a hug as she passed by, or a simple I love you whispered when the day felt too long. It was as if she had been quietly starving for these little reminders that she mattered. And the irony was, I had assumed she knew I loved her, but love isn't about assuming, it's about showing. One afternoon, she was struggling to carry groceries from the car. Without thinking, I ran out to help her. She looked at me with a small, almost shy smile and said, You're paying attention today. I chuckled, but inside I felt a deep pang of guilt. I should have been paying attention every day for 30 years. But the important thing was, I was learning, slowly, imperfectly, but truly learning. We started cooking together again, something we hadn't done in years. At first it felt awkward. I forgot ingredients. I spilled things. She laughed gently, and I realized that laughter, the shared kind, the one that fills a home, had been missing for far too long. One evening, while stirring a pot of soup together, she looked at me and said, I feel like we're finally noticing each other again. I nodded. Yes, finally. It wasn't a miracle that happened overnight. It was a series of small, consistent acts. Listening, noticing, touching, asking, smiling, sharing. These weren't dramatic or cinematic moments. They were ordinary, but ordinary had a power I had forgotten, the power to rebuild connection, to remind someone that they are seen, that they are loved. And it worked. Our conversations grew longer. Our silences felt comfortable, not lonely. Our home became warmer, not just because of the furnace or the lights, but because of the attention we gave each other. It struck me that I had spent years thinking I was doing enough. I wasn't. I had been present physically, but absent emotionally. And I realized something crucial. Being married isn't about being together for 30 years. It's about being present in every moment you share. Every gesture, no matter how small, was a thread weaving us back together. And with each thread, I felt a deeper sense of gratitude. Gratitude for her patience, her courage, and the love that never quite left. Even when I did, as we rebuilt our connection, it became clear that healing wasn't just about the present. It required looking back, facing the years we had let slip by without truly seeing each other. And that wasn't easy. One evening, while the children were out visiting friends, we sat together in the living room, the soft light of a lamp casting shadows on the walls. I finally said what I had been holding inside for weeks. I know I've hurt you over the years, not on purpose, but still, I hurt you, and I'm sorry. She looked at me quietly. I know, she said, and I've hurt you too in ways I didn't even realize. We both carried silence like a heavy weight. We began talking about the past, not to blame, not to argue, but to understand. We spoke of the nights we went to bed angry over small things, the words we never said, the apologies we never gave. We recalled the moments when we had been distant, too preoccupied with our own worlds to notice the other. It was painful. Memories came like waves, some gentle, some sharp, but each one carried a lesson, a reminder that love requires attention and care every single day. I feel like we wasted so much time, she whispered. Her voice trembled, but there was no bitterness, only longing for something lost. I took her hand in mine, feeling the familiar warmth I had once taken for granted. We didn't waste it, I said. We survived it, and now we have a chance to do better. That night we shared our fears openly. She admitted she had sometimes felt invisible, even when I was in the same room. I confessed how often I had assumed I was enough just by being there physically, without realizing that emotional presence mattered far more. We cried together, quietly, gently, without drama. Just two people finally being honest after decades of habit and routine. And in that honesty, I felt something fragile but powerful take root. Trust. Not the automatic, unquestioned trust of the early years, but a new kind of trust, one built on recognition, acknowledgement, and the willingness to truly see each other again. The next morning, we made a small ritual. Before leaving for our respective activities, we hugged longer than usual. I whispered, "I'm here. I see you." And she smiled, squeezing my hand in return. Simple words, simple gestures, yet they carried the weight of decades. The promise of renewed attention and care. I realized then that marriage isn't static. It doesn't survive on memories, nostalgia, or obligations. It survives on presence, on awareness, on choosing every day to show up for the person you promised to love. Even after 30 years, even when routines dull the edges of intimacy, even when life feels heavy with responsibilities, we were learning to be together again. And slowly, painstakingly, we were succeeding. As the months passed, something beautiful began to happen. We rediscovered joy in each other, not the loud, dramatic kind of joy, but quiet, steady happiness, the type that grows from feeling truly seen and appreciated. It started with small things. A shared cup of coffee in the morning, a walk around the neighborhood, laughing over a story from the past. We began remembering the little rituals that had once made our life together rich. The inside jokes, the nicknames, the songs we hummed while cooking. One Saturday, I suggested we revisit a place from our early years, the little cafe where we had our first date. She hesitated at first, as if unsure whether revisiting the past might reopen old wounds. But when we arrived, the smell of coffee, the soft music, and the familiar decor seemed to melt years away. We laughed as we remembered our nervous chatter that first evening. How awkward I had been trying to impress her. How she had teased me about my clumsiness. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I miss this," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the realization that we could create new happy moments. Moments that mattered as much as the old ones. Back at home, we started small traditions. Sunday mornings for pancakes, weekly evening walks, bedtime conversations without distractions. And gradually, the house felt warmer, not just from our attention, but from the laughter and ease that returned to our life together. I noticed other changes too. I began to anticipate her needs without being asked. A cup of tea when she came in from a long day. A gentle word when she looked tired. And she, in turn, noticed me, asking about my day, laughing at my jokes, sharing her little victories and frustrations. The most important change, however, was how we treated each other in moments of conflict. Arguments still happened, of course, but now we approached them differently. We listened. We sought to understand. We remembered the lessons of the past months. Presence, attention, and care are stronger than pride or stubbornness. One evening, sitting together on the couch, she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I feel like we're US again." I held her close and nodded. "Yes, we are, and we'll keep being us every day a little better than before." That night, as I watched her sleep, I realized how fragile and precious this connection was. 30 years had tested it, routines had dulled it, but love, true love, could be revived. It required effort, awareness, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. But most of all, it required showing up every day in small but meaningful ways. And I promised myself silently, as I often did, that I would never again take her presence for granted. That I would never again confuse physical proximity with emotional closeness. Because I had learned finally that the moments we share are what keep love alive. Years of routine, stress, and unspoken words had almost dulled the love between us. Yet, in the quiet persistence of small gestures, conversations, and attention, we had found each other again, and that discovery brought with it a lesson I will carry for the rest of my life. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she spoke softly. "I feel like we've learned something important," she said. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. We had learned that love isn't just about staying together. It isn't about being physically present or meeting expectations. It's about being truly seen, about listening when someone speaks, even when words seem ordinary, about noticing the little things that often go unspoken, the sighs, the gestures, the quiet fatigue. I realized that after 30 years of marriage, it's easy to take your partner for granted, to assume that love will endure simply because it always has. But love is not automatic. It must be nurtured, tended, and shown in every moment. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Presence matters more than perfection. Attention matters more than effort alone. And listening, really listening, is more powerful than any grand gesture. I looked at my wife, her face glowing softly in the warm light of the setting sun. And I felt a deep gratitude for her patience, gratitude for her courage in speaking up when I failed to notice her, gratitude for the love that never truly left, even when I had been absent in spirit. We sat in silence for a while, simply holding hands, letting the quiet speak for us. It was a comfortable silence, not empty, not strained, but full of understanding, forgiveness, and renewed connection. Later that night, as I reflected on the journey we had taken, I understood something vital. Life is too short to take love for granted. Moments pass quickly, years slip away, and if you're not careful, you can wake up one day realizing that someone you've spent decades with feels distant, unheard, unseen. But it's never too late. Not really. With patience, awareness, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths, you can rebuild, reconnect, and rediscover the love you thought was ordinary, and realize that it is extraordinary. And so I promise myself, and I promise anyone listening to this story, Do not wait to show the people you love that you see them. Do not wait to listen when they speak. Do not wait to hold their hand, ask about their day, or simply be present. Because love, at its deepest, is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about being there, fully, truly, and consistently for the person who shares your life. 30 years taught me this lesson, and I carry it every day. A lesson in presence, attention, and care. A lesson that lasts a lifetime.